A faint, almost imperceptible scent of iodine and bromine hangs in the air, a curious sharp perfume that clings to the velvet curtains and the woolen coat of the man who stands, patient and still, in the center of the room. It is a scent that speaks of strange alchemy, of light and shadow being coaxed into a new kind of permanence. Outside, the sounds of the 1840s drift through the tall studio window, the clatter of iron shod wheels on cobblestones, the distant cry of a street vendor, the low murmur of a world that is, as of yet, mostly unphotographed. But in here, in this quiet, sun-drenched space, a silent revolution is taking place on a small, polished silver plate. The photographer, a man of deliberate and unhurried movements, works not with the frantic energy of an artist in the throes of creation, but with the focused calm of a chemist or a watchmaker. His hands, stained with hints of silver nitrate, move with a practiced grace. He is not capturing a fleeting moment in the way we might understand it. He is not snatching a split second from the river of time. Instead, he is presiding over a slow, deliberate performance, a collaboration between himself, his subject, his chemical concoctions, and the sun. The process began long before the subject ever arrived. It started in the pre-dawn quiet with the polishing of the copper plate. The plate itself is a modest thing, no larger than a man's palm, a thin sheet of copper with one side clad in a mirror, bright layer of pure silver. It feels cool and heavy, a small, solid promise of an image. The polishing is a meditation. It is a slow, rhythmic act of abrasion and buffing that can take an hour or more. The photographer uses a series of fine powders, perhaps rotten stone or tripoli, mixed with a little oil or alcohol. He works with a soft leather buff, his arm moving in steady, circular motions. The goal is a perfect, flawless, liquid-like surface, a mirror so profound that it seems to hold a depth within itself. Any mistake, any stray piece of grit, any lingering trace of a fingerprint will be immortalized in the final image, a ghost in the machine before the machine has even begun its work. He inspects the surface constantly, holding it up to the light, turning it this way and that, watching how the reflections flow across its face. He is not just cleaning a surface, he is preparing a canvas for light itself. He is making the silver ready to see. Once the plate is deemed perfect, a state of almost impossible flawlessness, the next step begins in the dim confines of the sensitizing box. This is a small, light-proof cabinet, often made of dark, aged wood. Within it, two separate containers wait. One holds a small amount of crystalline iodine, the other, perhaps, bromine. These are the elements that will give the silver its sensitivity to light. The photographer slides the polished plate into a holder and places it inside the box, suspended face down over the iodine. He opens the container, and a faint, violet-hued vapor rises, invisible in the gloom but potent in its effect. The vapor drifts upwards and kisses the surface of the silver. A chemical reaction begins, slow and silent. The silver and the iodine atoms begin to weave together, forming a new compound, silver iodide. This new layer is infinitesimally thin, and its creation is judged not by sight, but by color. The photographer must remove the plate periodically and inspect it in the dimmest of light, looking for a very specific, delicate change in the hue of the surface. It must be just so. A pale, straw yellow, perhaps progressing to a soft rose gold. This is the color of readiness. It is a judgment born of experience, of countless plates prepared, some successful, many not. Too little exposure to the vapor and the plate will be sluggish, demanding an impossibly long time in the camera. Too much, and it will be overly sensitive, fogging. In the developing stage, the image lost to a chemical haze. He might then move it to the bromine chamber, a process known as accelerating, which adds a second layer of sensitivity, a ghostly film of silver bromide. This combination, a secret recipe of timing and intuition, is what allows the exposure times to be measured in minutes rather than hours. The plate is now alive. It is hungry for light. From this moment on it must be protected, kept in a light, tight holder, a dark slide covering its face, waiting for the moment it will be placed inside the camera. The camera itself is a simple, beautiful object. It is a box of polished mahogany or perhaps cherry wood, its corners joined with intricate dovetails. It has no complex internal mechanisms, no wiring shutters or clicking dials. It is, in essence, a dark chamber. At one end is the lens, a piece of glass ground with immense care, its brass housing gleaming softly in the light. The lens is the camera's eye, and its quality is paramount. It gathers the light that streams in from the world and focuses it onto a single plane at the back of the box. The photographer composes his image not through a viewfinder, but by looking at a ground glass screen that sits precisely where the silver plate will eventually be placed. He drapes a heavy, black cloth over his head and the back of the camera, creating a small, personal tent of darkness. In this private space, the outside world appears, inverted and reversed, a silent, colorful ghost shimmering on the frosted surface of the glass. The image is faint, almost ethereal, but it is there. He can see his subject, the gentleman in the woolen coat, sitting patiently in the chair. He can see the fall of light from the window on his cheek, the deep shadows in the folds of his clothing. With slow, deliberate movements, he adjusts the focus, turning a small brass knob that racks the lens slightly forward or backward. He is watching for that moment of perfect clarity, when the ghostly image on the ground glass snaps into sharp relief. He is painting with focus, deciding what will be crisp and what will be soft. The subject has been waiting. He sits in a high-backed chair, his posture unnaturally rigid. Behind him, unseen by the final image, is a metal brace, a sitter's stand, with a clamp that comes up to the back of his head, gently but firmly holding it in place. Any movement, even the slight, involuntary drift of a head, would blur the image into an unrecognizable smear during the long exposure. He has been instructed to fix his gaze on a point on the wall, to moisten his lips just before the exposure begins, and then to hold his expression. Not a smile, for a smile is a fleeting muscular contraction, impossible to hold for minutes on end. The expressions of the 1840s are somber, introspective, not because the people were unhappy, but because they had to be still. The photographer talks to him in a low, calming voice, not with commands, but with gentle reassurances. He explains the process, the necessity of the stillness, the magic that is about to unfold. There is a sense of occasion in the room, a quiet gravity. This is not a casual snapshot. It is a sitting, an event. For the man in the chair, it is a chance to have his likeness captured with a truthfulness that no painter could ever hope to match. He is to be rendered by the pencil of nature itself. The photographer emerges from under the black cloth, his eyes adjusting to the light of the room. The composition is set. The focus is perfect. He takes the light, tight holder containing the sensitized plate. With a steady hand, he removes the ground glass screen from the back of the camera and slides the holder into its place. There is a soft click as it locks into position. The silver plate, the prepared canvas, is now sitting in darkness at the focal plane of the lens, waiting. The room falls even more silent. The photographer takes the cap from the front of the lens. It is a simple brass or wooden cap that fits snugly over the glass. There is no shutter. The exposure begins the moment the cap is removed and ends the moment it is replaced. He looks at the subject one last time. Ready now. He says softly, "Hold your gaze." He removes the cap with a smooth, decisive motion. And now the quiet miracle begins. Light. Light, which has traveled 93 million miles from the sun, streams through the tall studio window, bounces off the face and clothing of the subject, and enters the brass-ringed lens of the camera. The glass gathers those rays and bends them, focusing them into a coherent image on the waiting silver iodide plate. An invisible transformation starts to happen. Where the light is brightest, the highlight on a cheekbone, the white of a starched collar, the chemical bond between the silver and the iodine begins to weaken. Where the light is dimmest, the dark wool of the coat, the shadows under the chair, the bond remains strong. For several long minutes, the subject sits a statue of himself. He tries not to blink, though he knows a few quick blinks will not register. He breathes slowly, shallowly. He can hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the building, each tick marking the passage of this strange, suspended time. He might feel a slight ache in his neck from the brace, a growing stiffness in his posture. He is acutely aware of the sunbeam slanting across the room, the dust motes dancing within it, the very source of the energy that is now etching his likeness onto that hidden plate. The photographer stands near the camera, his hand ready, his eyes on the clock, counting the seconds, which stretch into minutes. His calculation of the exposure time is a complex and intuitive art. It depends on the time of day, the season, the weather, the brightness of the sky, the complexion of the sitter, the color of their clothes. There are no light meters. There is only experience, instinct, and a silent prayer to the chemical gods. Finally, he He decides the moment is right. With the same smooth motion, he replaces the lens cap. The influx of light is cut off. The exposure is over. "You can relax now," he says. The subject lets out a slow breath, blinks and rolls his shoulders, the feeling of life returning to his muscles. He has done his part. But on the plate, inside its dark holder, there is still nothing to be seen. The image is latent, a secret held within the atomic structure of the silver halide crystals. The magic is only halfway complete. The photographer takes the holder back to his darkroom, a space even dimmer than the sensitizing area. This room is a sanctuary of chemical transformation, lit only by the faintest of red or yellow light, a light to which the plate is mostly insensitive. The air here is thick with another strange scent, the metallic tang of mercury. In the corner, a small spirit lamp sits under a cast iron pot containing a pool of mercury. The photographer carefully removes the silver plate from its holder and places it in a grooved box that will suspend it, face down over the pot. He lights the lamp. The mercury begins to warm very slowly. As its temperature rises, it begins to release a vapor. This vapor, like the iodine before it, rises and envelopes the surface of the plate. And now, the second stage of the miracle begins to unfold. The mercury vapor is drawn to the places on the plate where the light was strongest, where the chemical bonds were weakened. It amalgamates with the silver in those areas, forming a milky, white deposit. Where the light was absent, in the shadows, no amalgamation occurs. The latent image, the secret map of light and dark, is slowly, magically being developed. The photographer peers through a small glass window in the side of the developing box, watching the image emerge from the silvery void. It looks like a ghost appearing from a fog. First, the brightest highlights, the glint in an eye, the edge of a collar. Then, the mid-tones of the face, the texture of the skin. It is a process of breathtaking delicacy. To leave it too long would be to overdevelop, the highlights blooming and losing detail. To remove it too soon, and the image would be faint and weak. Once again, it is a judgment call, a moment of pure, practiced intuition. When he deems it perfect, he extinguishes the lamp and removes the plate. The image is there, a frosted, ethereal likeness on the silver surface. But it is still fragile. It is still, in a sense, alive. The parts of the plate that were not exposed to light are still coated in light, sensitive silver iodide. If the plate were brought out into the daylight now, it would continue to darken, the shadows filling in until the entire image was lost in a uniform fog. It must be fixed. The photographer takes the plate and immerses it in a solution of sodium thiosulfate, what was then commonly called hypo. This chemical bath dissolves away all the unexposed, remaining silver iodide, leaving only the silver-mercury amalgam of the image and the pure, polished silver of the shadows. The image is now permanent. It is no longer sensitive to light. He then carefully washes the plate in distilled water to remove any lingering trace of the hypo, which could tarnish the plate over time. He might tone the plate in a solution of gold chloride, a process that not only enriches the tones and adds a subtle warmth, but also makes the fragile image more durable. Finally, he holds the plate in his hands, tilting it in the dim light. The image is there. A daguerreotype is a strange and beautiful thing. It is not quite a photograph in the modern sense. It is a mirror with a memory. You must hold it at just the right angle to see the image clearly. Held one way, it is a positive image, the man's face looking out with a startling, lifelike presence. Held another way, the light catches the polished silver of the shadows, and it becomes a negative, a ghostly inversion of itself. The final step is the casing. The daguerreotype's surface is incredibly delicate. A single touch of a finger can smudge it forever. A wipe of a cloth can scratch it beyond repair. So it must be sealed away from the world. A brass mat is placed over the plate, protecting its edges and providing a formal frame. A piece of glass is placed over the mat. The whole sandwich, plate, mat, and glass is then carefully bound together with paper tape around the edges, sealing it against the air and dust. This sealed package is then placed into a decorative case, often made of wood covered in leather, lined with velvet or silk. It is a small, personal object, like a jewelry box or a locket. It closes with a small brass clasp. The photographer opens the case and looks at his work. There, resting on a bed of crimson velvet, is the face of the man from the studio chair, captured with an astonishing fidelity. Every wrinkle, every stray hair, the very texture of his skin and the light in his eyes is preserved. It is a silent, permanent echo of a few minutes of stillness on an autumn afternoon. He has not just made a picture. He has arrested time. He has made a ghost out of silver and light. While this meticulous drama of the daguerreotype was unfolding in studios from Paris to Philadelphia, a different, but equally slow, revolution was taking place on paper in the English countryside. The inventor of this rival process was a gentleman scholar, William Henry Fox Talbot. His vision of photography was different. He was not interested in creating a single perfect, jewel-like object. He sought a way to create reproducible images, to fix the beautiful, fleeting pictures he saw in his camera obscura. His process, which he called the calotype, or sometimes the Talbotype, was a dance of chemistry on paper rather than on silver. The journey of a calotype begins not with a metal plate, but with a sheet of high-quality writing paper. It must be fine, smooth, and evenly made, a product of a good paper mill. Talbot himself preferred Whatman's Turkey mill paper. The photographer would select a sheet, perhaps holding it up to the light to check for any imperfections in the weave or thickness. The first step was to sensitize it. In a dim room, the paper would be brushed with a solution of silver nitrate. The silver nitrate would soak into the fibers of the paper, making it weakly sensitive to light. The paper would then be dried, often by a gentle heat. At this stage, it could be stored for some time. When the photographer was ready to make a picture, he would take a sheet of this, or iodized paper, and perform the second part of the sensitization. This was the crucial step, the one that made the paper sensitive enough for use in a camera. He would brush it with a mixture of silver nitrate, acetic acid, and gallic acid. This nitrate of silver was a powerful accelerator. The paper, now damp and exquisitely sensitive to light, had to be used quickly, within a few hours at most. It was often placed in the camera while still damp. Like the daguerreotypist, the calotypist would use a wooden box camera with a lens to compose his image on a ground glass screen. He, too, would work under a dark cloth, focusing the ghostly, inverted image of the world. He might be out in a field, his camera aimed at his ancestral home, La Coque Abbey, or perhaps at a stand of ancient trees, a rustic barn, or a carefully arranged still life of books and scientific instruments. Once the scene was composed, he would replace the ground glass with the holder containing the sensitized paper. He would uncap the lens, and the slow, silent work of light would begin again. The exposure for a calotype was also long, ranging from a minute or two in bright sun to much longer in overcast conditions. The light would strike the paper, and a faint, latent image would form within its fibers, a secret map of weakened silver salts. After the exposure, the paper was taken back to the darkroom. To the naked eye, it still looked like a blank sheet. The image had to be developed. The photographer would immerse the paper in a bath of the same nitrate of silver solution used to sensitize it. He would watch, his heart likely beating a little faster, as the image slowly began to emerge. It was a different kind of magic from the daguerreotype's appearance in mercury vapor. Here the image seemed to bloom out of the paper itself, the dark areas deepening, the forms taking shape. The gallic acid was the developing agent, reducing the light, struck silver iodide to black metallic silver. The acetic acid acted as a restrainer, slowing the process down and preventing the entire sheet from turning black. The photographer would gently agitate the tray, watching the picture grow in strength and detail. Again, the judgment of when to stop the development was key. Too soon, and the image would be weak, too long, and it would be overly dark and plugged up, the shadows losing all detail. Once developed, the paper image was fixed in a bath of hypo, just like the daguerreotype, to remove the unexposed silver salts and make it permanent. After a thorough washing, it was dried. What the photographer held in his hand now was not a finished picture, but a negative. Everything was reversed. The sky was black, the dark trunks of trees were white. It was a ghostly, inverted world. To the uninitiated, it might have looked like a failure. But to Talbot and to the other calotypists, this negative was the key. It was the matrix, the seed from which endless copies could be grown. The final stage of the calotype process was printing. The photographer would take his paper negative and place it on top of another sheet of paper, salted paper, that had been sensitized with silver chloride. He would press the two sheets together tightly in a wooden printing frame with a glass front. He would then take this frame out into the sunlight. This was a printing out process. No developer was needed. The light of the sun itself would do the work. The light would pass through the thin, white areas of the negative, the shadows of the original scene, and darken the salted paper beneath. Where the negative was dark and dense, the highlights of the original scene, the light would be blocked, and the paper beneath would remain white. The photographer could watch the positive image appear as if being painted by an invisible hand. He could check its progress by opening the back of the printing frame in a dim corner. The process could take many minutes, sometimes hours, depending on the brightness of the sun and the density of the negative. When the print was dark enough, he would take it inside, fix it in hypo, wash it, and sometimes tone it with gold for permanence and a richer color. The final calotype print had a character all its own, utterly different from the sharp, metallic sheen of a daguerreotype. It was softer, more atmospheric. The texture of the paper fibers was visible in the final image, giving it a quality that was often compared to a charcoal drawing or an aquatint. It did not have the microscopic, startling detail of a daguerreotype, but it possessed a different kind of beauty, a romantic, slightly melancholic softness. And, crucially, from a single paper negative, the photographer could make dozens of positive prints. He could create albums, send copies to friends, or publish books illustrated with actual photographs. This was the dawn of photography as a means of mass communication. Living as a photographer in the 1840s was to live on a frontier of science and art. It was a life of patience, of trial and error, of constant, quiet observation. The materials were expensive and often capricious. The chemicals were potent, sometimes dangerous. A photographer's hands were perpetually stained, his lungs exposed to strange vapors. Success was never guaranteed. A batch of paper might be faulty. A chemical solution might be mixed incorrectly. The temperature of the room could affect development. The sun might disappear behind a cloud mid-exposure, ruining a carefully timed sitting. For every beautiful, successful image that has survived to this day, there were likely dozens of failures, plates that were fogged, underexposed, overdeveloped, scratched, or simply blank. It was a craft that demanded a peculiar combination of skills, the precision of a scientist, the aesthetic eye of an artist, and the perseverance of a saint. Imagine the quiet of the studio, the sitter, frozen in time, trying to maintain a neutral, sustainable expression. The photographer, a silent conductor, orchestrating the flow of light and the reactions of his chemicals. There is a slowness to the whole affair that is almost unimaginable to us now. The time it took to polish the plate, to sensitize it, to sit for the exposure, to develop, fix, and finish it, a single portrait could be the work of a whole morning. There was no instant gratification. There was only the slow, methodical, step-by-step process, a ritual that, if performed correctly, would yield a small miracle. And for the person seeing a photograph for the first time, it must have been an experience of profound wonder and perhaps a little unease. To see a human face rendered with such perfect, impersonal accuracy was uncanny. A painted portrait was always an interpretation, filtered through the hand and eye of the artist. But a daguerreotype seemed to be a direct transcription of reality, a slice of the world itself. It was as if the person in the portrait was somehow still there, looking out from behind the veil of silver. Elizabeth Barrett wrote of her own daguerreotype portrait. It is a studious, pensive face, with a certain character of thought and feeling in it. I would rather have such a memorial of one I loved than the most beautiful picture ever painted. It was a new kind of truth, a new kind of memory. The calotype, with its soft, brownish tones and paper texture, offered a different kind of truth. It was less a mirror and more a memory made tangible. It captured the way light fell on ancient stone, the texture of foliage, the atmosphere of a place. The slight imperfections, the grain of the paper, the soft focus, did not detract from its power, but rather added to its poetic quality. It was a more personal, more handmade vision of the world. The photographer could even manipulate the image, retouching the negative with a pencil to add highlights or darken shadows, a precursor to all the photo editing to come. The world of the 1840s photographer was a small one. It was a fraternity of amateurs, scientists, and entrepreneurs, all captivated by this new magic. They wrote to each other, sharing their formulas, their triumphs, and their frustrations. They formed photographic societies and held exhibitions. They were aware that they were standing at the beginning of something immense. They were inventing a new way of seeing, a new language. They were teaching the world how to read these new images, how to understand their strange, silent testimony. The slow process of early photography was more than just a technical procedure. It was a form of contemplation. It required a deep and patient engagement with the world. It was a way of slowing down time, of looking with intense focus, and of cherishing the quiet, subtle details of light, shadow, and form. It was a conversation between the photographer and the physical world, a conversation written in silver and light, a conversation that we are still learning to read today. The daily rhythm of one of these early photographic establishments was dictated by the sun. The most precious resource was good, clear light, and the architecture of the studio was designed to harvest it. Many studios were built on the top floors of buildings, with large, sloping skylights made of glass, often facing north to provide a strong, consistent light without the harsh, moving shadows of direct sun. On a bright, clear day, the studio would be a hive of activity. Sitters would be scheduled, plates prepared in a steady sequence. The photographer and perhaps an assistant or two would move with a quiet efficiency, one polishing plates while another positions a sitter, while the photographer himself consults on exposure times and operates the camera. The air would be a cocktail of chemical scents, the sharp iodine, the metallic mercury, the vinegary hypo, all mingling with the scent of wood polish and the faint perfume or cologne of the clientele. On a cloudy day, the rhythm would change. Exposures would become dramatically longer. A portrait that might take 1 minute in full sun could require 5, 10, or even 15 minutes under a gray sky. The challenge for the sitter to remain motionless would become immense, almost heroic. The photographer would have to use every trick at his disposal, more acceleration with bromine, perhaps, or a wider aperture on the lens, which would sacrifice some sharpness of focus for speed. These were the days of struggle, of pushing the technology to its very limits. Rainy days might be given over entirely to other tasks, mixing fresh chemical stocks, a delicate and precise business, cutting and cleaning glass for the sealed packages, carefully coloring finished daguerreotypes with a tiny brush and dry pigments to give a pale, lifelike blush to a cheek or a hint of gold to a watch chain, or printing calotypes, if the sun should happen to break through the clouds for a while. The clientele was varied. In the beginning, it was the wealthy, the curious, and the vain who sought out the daguerreotypist. A portrait was still a luxury, costing several dollars at a time when a skilled laborer might earn $1 a day. It was a statement of status, a modern marvel to own. Families would come, dressed in their Sunday best, the children scrubbed and sternly instructed to be still. The photographer had to be a master of child psychology, coaxing a few moments of placid stillness from a restless toddler. He might use a watch or a small toy to fix their attention, but often the results were a soft blur where a head had moved, a ghostly image that spoke of the impossibility of truly freezing childhood. But photographers also captured the faces of the famous politicians, actors, writers. A portrait of a renowned figure like Daniel Webster or Edgar Allan Poe was not just a picture, it was a historical document. It allowed the public to see the face of a person they had only read about, to scrutinize their features, to look them in the eye. The photograph became a tool of public life, shaping reputations and creating a new kind of celebrity. And there were the post-mortem portraits. In an era of high infant and child mortality, a photograph was often the only visual record a family would have of a lost loved one. A photographer would be called to a home to make a daguerreotype of a child in its coffin, or a loved one in their final sleep. These images, which can seem morbid to us, were deeply cherished mementos. They were a final, desperate attempt to hold on to a face, to cheat death of its total erasure. The photographer in these moments was not just a technician, he was a gentle witness to grief, working with quiet respect in a house of mourning. For the calotypist, often a country gentleman or a traveling artist, the subject matter was different. Talbot himself photographed the architecture of his home, the implements in his barn, the pages of old books. He was interested in texture, in the play of light on surfaces, in the way photography could catalogue the world. His followers, like the Scottish duo David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson, turned their paper process to portraiture, creating a stunning gallery of Scottish life. They photographed fishermen and their wives, clergymen, soldiers, and high society ladies. Because the calotype process was a little faster than the early daguerreotypes, and could be practiced outdoors more easily. Their portraits have a naturalness, a sense of life being lived, that is deeply compelling. They captured the rugged, weathered faces of the Nuovan fishwives, their clothes layered and worn, their expressions full of character. These were not the stiff, formal portraits of the city studio. These were collaborations with the Scottish light and the Scottish people. The tools of the trade filled the photographers' rooms. There were boxes of copper plates, bottles of chemicals with handwritten labels, scales for weighing out silver nitrate and potassium iodide, glass funnels and graduates for measuring liquids, buffing sticks and leather pads, trays of porcelain and glass for developing and fixing, and printing frames of oak and brass. It was a laboratory as much as a studio, and everywhere there was the evidence of experimentation. Scraps of paper with notes on exposure times, test prints with different tones, spoiled plates that had been set aside. The photographer was in a constant dialogue with his materials, learning their quirks, their limits, their potential. He was part alchemist, part showman, part artist, part tradesman. Consider the sensory experience of being in that world. The feel of a heavy, polished mahogany camera in your hands. The smell of the darkroom, a place of potent, mysterious transformations. The sight of an image emerging from nowhere on a blank surface, a moment of pure magic that must have never grown old. The sound of the silence in the studio during a long exposure, a silence punctuated only by the ticking of the clock and the faint sounds of the street outside. The satisfaction of closing a finished daguerreotype case, knowing you have created something beautiful and permanent, a small treasure that might be passed down for generations. The process also changed the way people saw the world around them. Once you started to think in terms of photographs, you started to notice light in a new way. You would see the way it fell across a building, the way it created deep shadows in a forest, the way it reflected in a puddle after a rainstorm. The world became a series of potential pictures. The photographer was learning to see what the camera would see, to anticipate how the tones of the real world would translate into the monochrome palette of silver. It was a new visual literacy, and this new literacy was spreading. Photographic manuals were published, explaining the processes in dense, technical detail. Amateurs bought kits and tried to make their own pictures, often with comical or disastrous results. The chemicals could be dangerous if handled improperly. Silver nitrate would stain skin and clothes a persistent dark brown. Mercury vapor was, of course, highly toxic, a fact that was not fully appreciated at the time. Many early photographers likely suffered from health problems as a result of their work, a slow poisoning in the pursuit of their art. The rivalry between the daguerreotype and the calotype was also a defining feature of the 1840s. It was a battle of philosophies as much as technologies. The daguerreotype was a dead end, a unique object that could not be copied. It was the pinnacle of photographic detail, a thing of exquisite, almost supernatural clarity. The calotype was the future. The negative-positive process was the foundation for all photography until the digital age. It was reproducible, versatile, and ultimately more democratic. Talbot patented his process in England, which limited its adoption there, while the daguerreotype was given freely to the world by the French government, except in England, where a patent was also secured. This led to different photographic cultures developing. In America, the daguerreotype boomed, with studios in every major city. In France, both processes were explored. In Britain, the patent restrictions on the calotype pushed many photographers to experiment with other processes on glass, leading to the development of the wet plate collodion process in the next decade, a process that would combine the detail of the daguerreotype with the reproducibility of the calotype and would come to dominate photography for the rest of the 19th century. But in the 1840s, these two methods reigned supreme, two different ways of answering the ancient human desire to make a permanent image of the fleeting world. It was a decade of slow, deliberate discovery, a time when making a single picture was an adventure, a challenge, and an act of faith. It was a time of quiet rooms, patient sitters, and the silent, powerful work of the sun. To step into the world of an early photographer is to step into a slower, more contemplative relationship with time, with light, and with the very act of seeing. It is to remember that every photograph was once a small miracle, coaxed into existence through patience, skill, and a little bit of chemical magic. The faint scent of iodine on the air was the smell of a new world being born, a world where memory could be held in your hand, and a moment of stillness could last forever. The photographer's relationship with his lens was one of deep respect. These early photographic lenses, often of the Petzval design, were marvels of optical engineering for their time. They were physically heavy, made of brass and thick glass elements, and were designed to be fast. That is, to admit as much light as possible to shorten the agonizingly long exposure times. However, this speed came at a cost. The depth of field was incredibly shallow. When the photographer focused on the sitter's eyes, the tip of their nose and their ears would already be slightly soft. The background would fall away into a beautiful, painterly blur. This optical signature is one of the defining aesthetic qualities of early portraits. The photographer had to choose his plane of focus with extreme care. It was the heart of the composition, the anchor of the portrait's reality. He would spend long moments under the dark cloth, tweaking the focus knob by a hair's breadth, watching the shimmering image on the ground glass swim in and out of clarity until that one perfect plane was found. Let us imagine the experience of the sitter in more detail. You arrive at the studio, perhaps having traveled by horse-drawn omnibus. You ascend a long flight of stairs to the top of the building, where the light is best. You are shown into a waiting room, perhaps decorated with examples of the photographer's work, cased daguerreotypes, displayed like jewels on a table. You are nervous. You have heard about this process, but you do not fully understand it. You know you will have to be still, unnaturally still. The photographer greets you. He is a serious, focused man, his hands bearing the faint, dark stains of his trade. He speaks to you in a low, even tone, explaining what will happen. He leads you into the studio proper, a room that feels like a cross between a greenhouse and an alchemist's laboratory. The huge skylight dominates the space, flooding it with a cool, northern light. The camera stands on its heavy wooden tripod like a strange, one-eyed creature. There are props, a velvet draped table, a column, a painted backdrop of a classical landscape. He seats you in the chair, a solid, unyielding piece of furniture. You feel the cold, metal fingers of the head brace cup the back of your skull. It is not painful, but it is deeply strange, a constant, firm reminder not to move. He arranges your posture, turning a shoulder slightly, tilting your head. He adjusts a large, white reflector screen on a stand to bounce some light back into the shadows on your face. He is sculpting with light. He disappears under the black cloth at the back of the camera, a headless figure fussing with his machine. You sit and wait. You can hear his muffled voice as he talks to himself, or perhaps to you. It's hard to tell. Then he emerges and gives you your final instructions. He tells you where to look, to breathe slowly, not to swallow if you can help it. The final moments before the exposure begins are filled with a quiet, palpable tension. You compose your face into an expression of serious dignity, the best you can manage. You know this image may be how you are remembered. He removes the brass cap from the lens. Your work begins the work of being still. You count the seconds in your head. You become aware of the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam. You feel a fly land on your hand, and you fight the urge to flick it away. Your eyes begin to water from staring, but you try not to blink. A minute feels like an eternity. The world outside the studio window seems to fade away. Your entire universe becomes this room, this chair, this stillness, this silent communion with the unblinking glass eye of the camera. When the photographer finally replaces the cap, the release is profound. You feel as though you have been holding your breath for the entire time. Now consider the journey of that finished photograph. The cased daguerreotype is a private object. It is held in the hand. It is opened like a book. It is kept on a mantelpiece or in a drawer. It is looked at in moments of quiet reflection. It is a one-to-one connection with the person depicted. The calotype print is a more social object. It can be mounted in an album, its soft tones and matte surface harmonizing with the paper of the pages. An album of calotypes tells a story, a sequence of views and portraits. It can be sent in a letter, a piece of the sender's world traveling across the country or the ocean. The two formats foster different ways of interacting with a photograph, one intimate and precious, the other communicative and expansive. The early photographer was also a small-scale manufacturer. He had to produce his own sensitive materials from scratch, every single time. A daguerreotypist didn't just buy a pack of plates. He bought copper sheets and had them silvered, or bought pre-silvered plates that he would then cut and polish. A calotypist didn't buy a roll of film. He bought reams of writing paper and spent days preparing it. This gave them an intimate knowledge of their materials that is lost to most photographers today. They understood the chemistry not just from a book, but through the feeling in their hands, the look of the solutions, the smell in the air. They were true craftspeople. They could read the weather and the light and know how to adjust their formulas. They could look at a finished negative and know exactly what had gone right or wrong in the long chain of steps. This deep craft-based knowledge was essential because the processes were inherently unstable. A batch of paper from the mill might have a different sizing that would react unexpectedly with the silver nitrate. A new bottle of bromine might be a slightly different purity, throwing off the sensitization times. The temperature of the tap water used for washing could fluctuate, affecting the final tone of the print. The photographer had to be a master of improvisation, constantly tweaking and adjusting his methods to account for the endless variables of the real world. He kept a notebook, a bible of formulas and observations, a record of his long and often frustrating journey toward mastery. This era was also one of great discovery in the chemistry of photography. Photographers were not just using established recipes, they were inventing new ones. They experimented with different sensitizers, trying to increase the speed of their plates and papers. They tried different developing agents, looking for finer grain or richer tones. They experimented with toning solutions, gold, platinum, selenium, to change the color and increase the permanence of their prints. A man like Gustave Le Gray in France, for example, experimented with waxing the paper negative before exposure. This made the paper more transparent, hiding the paper fibers and producing a sharper, more detailed print, closer to the quality of a daguerreotype, but still reproducible. This constant innovation, driven by a community of passionate practitioners, is what pushed the medium forward so quickly. In the space of a single decade, photography went from a near miraculous curiosity to a viable, if challenging, commercial enterprise and art form. The slow, patient work of the 1840s laid the entire foundation for the visual world we live in today. Every photograph we see, every digital image that flashes across our screens, is a direct descendant of those first, difficult, magical images made on polished silver and humble paper. They were the seeds of a new way of seeing, planted in quiet rooms by the slow, steady hand of the sun. The financial reality of running a studio was also a constant pressure. The silver plates, the chemicals, the rent on a top-floor studio, the elegant cases, it all cost a great deal of money. A successful sitting meant income, but a spoiled plate was a loss of expensive materials and valuable time. The photographer had to balance the art and the science with the need to run a profitable business. This meant they had to be efficient. The workflow of polishing, sensitizing, exposing, developing, and finishing had to be a smooth, well-oiled process. An assistant was crucial. While the master photographer dealt with the sitter and the camera, the assistant would be in the back rooms, polishing the next plate, preparing the chemical baths. The studio was a small factory for producing likenesses. Let's not forget the soundscape of the process. Beyond the ticking clock, there was the rhythmic, soft shush of the buff on the silver plate during polishing, the clink of glass bottles in the darkroom, the gentle slosh of liquids as a plate was moved from one chemical bath to another, the snap of the clasps on the finished cases. These were the quiet, domestic sounds of a new industry being born. There was also the photographer's voice, a constant, low murmur of instruction and reassurance to the sitter, a key tool in achieving the necessary stillness. A little more to the left, sir. Chin up, just a fraction. Now hold that expression. Perfect. We begin. The 1840s also saw the very first news photography, though not as we know it. When a great fire broke out in Hamburg in 1842, a couple of daguerreotypists, Hermann Bayer and Carl Ferdinand Stelzner, climbed a tower and made plates of the devastation. These were not action shots. They were static, long exposure views of smoking ruins. But they were a powerful testament to the event. They showed people a truth that a drawing could only approximate. The photograph was beginning its long career as a witness. Similarly, calotypes were taken of the construction of Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, documenting the slow rise of a great public monument. Photography was not just for portraits, it was for recording the world, for creating a historical record. The calotype process, in particular, lent itself to this documentary impulse. A photographer could prepare a batch of iodized paper, pack his camera and chemicals into a trunk, and travel. He could go to ancient ruins, to distant landscapes, to foreign cities. The French government, in the 1850s, would commission photographers to travel the country and create a photographic survey of its architectural heritage, a project called the Missions Heliographiques. This was a direct result of the potential that was first unlocked by Talbot's paper process in the 1840s. The photograph was becoming an archive, a way for a nation to see and understand itself. Think of the photographer at the end of a long day. The last sitter has gone. The sun is low in the sky, the precious light fading. He cleans his equipment, carefully putting away his chemicals. His back aches from stooping over the camera and the developing trays. His hands are stained and smell faintly of hypo. On a table, a row of finished daguerreotypes waits to be collected by their owners. He might pick one up, open the case, and look at the face he has captured. In the fading light, the silver image seems to glow with a life of its own. It is a moment of quiet pride and wonder. He has spent his day in a slow, careful dance with the laws of optics and chemistry. He has used the sun as his paintbrush and silver as his canvas. He has made something that did not exist in the world before, a frozen piece of time, a silent memory that will outlast him. He is tired, but it is the good kind of tired, the exhaustion that comes from a day of meaningful, creative work. He closes the case, and the room falls into darkness. The slow process is over for today. Let's delve deeper into the alchemical nature of the darkroom. This was a space of genuine transformation, and it must have felt that way to the practitioner. It was a room set apart, a sanctum. To enter it was to leave the sunlit world of normal perception and enter a realm governed by different rules. The only light was the eerie, monochromatic glow of a safe light, usually a candle shielded by a piece of red or yellow glass. This light was too weak to affect the photographic materials, but it was enough to see by once your eyes had adjusted. It cast long, strange shadows and made familiar objects look alien. The shelves were lined with bottles of mysterious liquids, their labels often written in a spidery hand: silver nitrate, gallic acid, potassium cyanide, gold chloride. Some of these chemicals were benign, but others were deadly poisons. The photographer worked with a deep respect for his materials. He knew that a single drop of the wrong solution could ruin his work, and that some of them could harm him. The development of the image was the climax of the darkroom ritual. For the daguerreotypist, it was watching the ghostly image form in the mercury vapor. He would be hunched over the fuming box, peering through the small window, his face illuminated by the tiny flame of the spirit lamp. It was an act of intense, focused observation. He was watching for the subtle signs that the development was complete, for the moment when the highlights were bright, but not yet solarized or burned out. For the calotypist, it was rocking the tray of developer, watching the blank paper give birth to an image. The dark areas would slowly emerge from the pale background, like a memory surfacing in the mind. He would see the branches of a tree, the face of a friend, the stones of a building, all appearing where moments before there was nothing. It must have been a profoundly moving experience, a direct encounter with the magical power of chemistry to reveal a hidden reality. After development came the fixing bath. This was the moment of stabilization, when the fleeting, light-sensitive image was made permanent. When the plate or print was slipped into the hypo, the milky, unexposed silver halides would begin to dissolve and wash away. You could literally see the image clearing, the shadows becoming deeper and more transparent. This was a moment of relief, of securing the prize. The image was now safe. It could be brought out into the light of day and looked at without fear of it vanishing. The final washing was also crucial. Any trace of the fixing chemicals left on the plate or paper would eventually cause the image to degrade and fade, a slow, sad decay. So the photographer would wash his creations carefully, in multiple changes of clean water, ensuring their longevity. He was not just making a picture for today, he was making it for tomorrow, for posterity. The aesthetic choices available to the photographer were limited, but significant. He chose the pose of the sitter, the lighting, the background. He chose the moment of exposure. He controlled the development to produce a harder or softer image. With the calotype, he chose the paper, a choice that would have a profound effect on the final look of the print. A rough, textured paper would create a broad, atmospheric image, while a smooth, fine-grained paper would yield more detail. He could also tone his prints, bathing them in solutions that would change their color from a reddish brown to a purplish black or a rich chocolate brown. These were all ways of putting his own personal stamp on the image, of moving from pure documentation to artistic expression. Consider the mental state required. The slow processes demanded a kind of mindfulness, a complete absorption in the task at hand. When polishing a plate, the photographer could not let his mind wander. He had to be entirely focused on the pressure of his hand, the feel of the buff, the look of the reflection. When timing an exposure, he had to be present, attentive to the light and the passage of the seconds. This intense focus, this slowing down of time, is the very opposite of our modern digital experience. We snap hundreds of photos with our phones, barely looking, and let an algorithm do the rest. The early photographer had to invest himself completely, physically and mentally, in the creation of a single image. This investment is what gives these old photographs their power. They feel weighty, considered important. They are the products of a deep and patient seeing. The language used to describe photography in the 1840s is also revealing. Talbot called his invention the pencil of nature. This phrase captures the profound sense of wonder that people felt. It was not a human hand that drew these pictures, but nature itself. The sun was the artist. The photograph was seen as a form of natural magic, a direct imprint of the real. This belief in the truthfulness of the photograph was one of its most powerful attractions. It was a new kind of evidence, a new way of knowing the world. Of course, people quickly realized that photographs could be manipulated, that the camera's truth was not always absolute. A photographer could choose what to include in the frame and what to leave out. He could pose his subjects, create a fictional scene. But the fundamental belief in the photograph's connection to reality remained, and it has shaped our visual culture ever since. Let us end by returning to the finished object, the cased daguerreotype. It is a thing of contradictions. It is both incredibly detailed and strangely elusive. It is a public portrait and a private treasure. It is a chemical process and a work of art. It is a mirror and a memory. To hold one in your hand is to hold a piece of the past, a past that looks out at you with a startling and silent immediacy. The man in the woolen coat is long gone. The studio has been torn down. The world of horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps has vanished. But his face remains, captured by the slow, patient magic of silver and light. The daguerreotype is a testament to a time when making a picture was a slow, difficult, and profound act, a quiet collaboration between a patient human and the steady, silent eye of the sun. It is a whisper from the 1840s, a whisper that tells us about the birth of a new way of seeing, and about the timeless human desire to leave a trace, to hold a moment, to make a memory that does not fade. The slow process was not a bug, but a feature. It was the space in which a new art form found its soul.